and her family as well. We have our homebound folks that we're aware of listed for you there, our nursing home people, and our military guys and girls, men and women. So remember all of them in your prayers. We run into Brother Fred Smith Sunday at lunch, and they were up here at the Mexican hut up the street, and they were excited because this past Sunday they'd had 39, and the Sunday before he went out there they had 7, and so you take 7 and you go to 30. However many weeks he's been there, it's a big change. And I think he told me they had 19 or something like that last Wednesday, maybe. I think that's the right number. So he's excited, they're excited, and things seem to be going good there. So keep them in your thoughts and in your prayers as you pray. I did check this afternoon, just before I came back here, about the number of folks that had been saved between that 4-state fair thing in Texarkana and then Brother Leo's trip. He told me there was 95 to 100 at the fair that were saved that week, and then their trip to San Angelo, I can't remember when they left, Thursday or something like that of last week, and as of about an hour ago, they'd had 55 saved on their trip. So between the two, it's 150, give or take a few. So, and we do all realize that it takes a long time for a regular church to have 150 people saved. And we witnessed it between these two things in two weeks. We saw that happen. So we give glory to the Lord and for what He's doing and will continue to do in the days to come. Okay. Any names we need to call? Prayer. Did Barbara get out of the hospital? Okay. Tom?
Walking along on there.
Okay.
She can't recognize her own kids.
Wow. Okay. All right. Any more? Okay. Tell me the name again. Okay. Adam, one of the guys that sits over here with Travis, he hurt his back. I think he gave Travis a piggyback ride. That right, Travis? All right, any more? Eddie.
All right, 229, Our God Reigns. We'll do the first and last verse. How lovely on the mountains are the feet of him who brings good news, announcing peace, proclaiming news of happiness. Our God reigns. Our God reigns. Our God reigns. Our God reigns. tomb. He came with grace and majesty. He is alive. He is alive. God loves us so. See here his hands, his feet, his side. Yes, we know he is alive. Our God reigns. Our God reigns. Our God reigns. Our God reigns. Amen. Ushers, if you would come ahead, and we'll have a word of prayer tonight. All right.
Our most gracious Lord, we thank Thee for this day. We thank Thee for our presence here tonight to lift Your name on high. We thank You for Your love, Your mercy, and Your grace. We ask You to be with all the ones on our prayer list. Be with the ones that's sick, heal them so they can come back. We ask You to help this offering as we take it for the good of our church. All this we ask in Your precious holy name. Amen.
Man, thank you, Carolyn. Celia mentioned to me before we started, and I forgot that Miss Eva is going to be seeing a pain management doctor. Okay, all right. So add Eva Crow to your prayer list, if you would, please. All right, we're going to do something different today, and we'll finish what we started next week. And I usually watch the calendar better than I did this time, and I just like these stories about the voices of Easter, and so I let last week come and go, and I didn't notice the week that it was, but I can't do all of them tonight, but I'm going to give you 45 minutes worth of them, and they bless me. I don't know if they do you or not, but they do me. It's just the story of Easter from the viewpoint of some different characters that are involved in the story. And so I'm just going to begin. It's the character of Judas, and we find his story in Matthew 26. And again, then over in Matthew 27, the main part of his story. But it's written like this. It says, I stand at the edge of a cliff, a rope around my neck. The other end is tied to a limb on that tree. Dark thoughts fill my mind, and I wonder what's come over me. I really should have been a leader. I was named Judas after the great patriarch Judah, first among the 12 tribes of Israel. I should have been first among the 12, not old Peter. But there's no other way. I've done some unspeakable things. I've betrayed my master. I'm the voice of betrayal. I deserve to die, and that will be my end. At least then, nobody will be able to use me ever again. I hate it when people use me. The religious leaders tried to use me. They all wanted as an opportunity to arrest Jesus without creating a riot. I gave them that opportunity. They used me. They paid me off. I thought Jesus wanted to use me too. He wanted to use me to build his kingdom. And he wanted to change me. I could see it in his eyes every time the money box come up short. He knew I was stealing. He knew all about me, and he should have hated me. I could fool everybody except him. I grew to hate him. This tree and this cliff will put an end to all of their plans, and he wanted me, but only on his terms. I will not belong to another. I will not be the possession of anyone. I shall be of no use to them now. No more errand boy, no more teacher's helper. Nobody can help him now. They have him. You see, it all came to pass, and it came to me at the Passover meal. We gathered in an upper room with Jesus to celebrate the feast. I was overwhelmed with a sudden clarity of purpose and an amazing strength of resolve. I could see it all coming together. It would be easy. I knew what I had been made for. It was perfect. The conversation around the table was about the week's festival. One or two had something to say about the interfering Romans, but most of the talk was about the faithfulness of God who redeemed Israel from Egypt a long time ago. I was silent, though. Jesus caught my eye a few times, but when it happened, I just looked away. Then Jesus interrupted the conversation by announcing that one of us, seated around the table, would betray him. And the room was instantly still. The faces around the table all showed stunned amazement. Of course, everyone had heard talk that the leaders of the council would pay for information leading to Jesus' arrest, but none of them imagined that anyone would ever betray the Master. One by one, each disciple asked if he were the one. I asked too, of course. Low voices ringed the table in worried discussion. The meal progressed. As I dipped my hand in the dish, Jesus said something to the two next to him, Peter and John. They looked at me, wariness on their faces, and I knew he told them. I don't know how he knew, but I had already been to the chief priest and offered to betray Jesus, and somehow he's found out about it. I had to get out of there. I stood and I rushed out of the room. It was time. I expected them to go to the Garden of Gethsemane after dinner. Whenever we visited Jerusalem, this was his favorite place. He loved the solitude for prayer. I went straight to the chief priest and I told him to hurry. If the other disciples guessed my plan, they may spoil everything. We must act now, I told them. They agreed. Some went to get the temple police. The rest of us went to the Roman garrison, and where the priest requested a contingent of soldiers to accompany us. I led the way. It was exhilarating. I was in command. No one using me, everybody following me. I had the power. When we got to the garden, as I expected, Jesus was praying. The others had fallen asleep. Jesus heard us coming and roused the disciples. I stepped forward from the shadows. It was dark and the torches didn't provide much light. I had arranged a signal to identify Jesus in the darkness. I kissed him on the cheek and greeted him, Rabbi. I had greeted him that way 100 times, and we all had, with a simple daily habit, an innocent token of greeting. I betrayed the Master. He always wanted to be the Master. He wanted to be served. For all his talk about serving others, he always was the Master, as though he had been born king or something. Well, now that they have him, what kind of kingdom do you think he'll inherit? It's one thing to lead a few disciples and country peasants when the sun shines on the hillside. But see if anybody follows him now, when night is come and all is darkness. Nobody can rule from a cross. Well, I will not serve him. I am no one's fool. And now, finally, in this act, I'm free. Not being used by anyone, free. A rope around my neck, standing on the edge of this cliff. Soon I'll be free. And yet I wonder, can a man's death solve anything? I mean, if a man gives himself to death freely, no one taking it from him, can one who gives himself to death accomplish anything? Can a dead man hanging on a tree serve any purpose? I'm going to find out, because I'm just one step away from freedom. Then there's the voice of Peter. Did you hear it? That rooster. Did it wake you? That rooster. I still hear it there. There it is again. No, I'm fine. I guess it just startled me. I've been up all night. I didn't realize the morning was so near, but it's dark. What hour is it? Man, it's so cold. It's cold out here. What are you doing in the street? Yes, I'm from Galilee. Why does everyone have to make such a big deal out of the obvious? It's not your fault. I'm a fisherman. I've heard roosters crow before, as far back as I can remember. We would fish all night. We would hear the roosters at daybreak when it was time to bring our catch to the shore. And when I was just a boy and had fallen asleep in the boat, I would hear the roosters crowing and wake to hear the far-off voices of my father and others discussing the catch from the night. And he would look across to me in the gray light, and our eyes would meet. Rooster music. It meant an end to the night and to the cold. It meant home and warmth and food, but it'll never mean that after tonight. See, I've been with Jesus, and they have him now in Caiaphas' dungeon. I'm afraid now the Romans are in with him. The master warned me. He said Satan would sift me like a farmer sifting wheat. But Jesus had prayed for me that my faith would not completely fail. He told us he was going to die, and I said, no, I would die for you, Master. What brave words, and now I'm the voice of denial. Earlier tonight, I tried to defend him in the Garden of Gethsemane. We awoke suddenly. There were torches and soldiers, a mob with clubs. I had a short sword, and I jumped to my feet swinging. I had a fair shot at one of them, too, but he moved his head at the last instant, and all I got was his ear. And Jesus rebuked me. He told me to put the sword up. The soldier who grabbed me from behind made sure I did, and then it was all noise and confusion. They took him. They nearly trampled us. Even a garden doesn't offer many soft places to land in the dark. By the time we collected ourselves, they were gone. John and I, we followed a ways back. They brought him into the city. We made our way through the dark streets, staying a safe distance behind the soldiers, all the way across town. We soon guessed they were bringing him here to the palace of the high priest, but what for? The council couldn't meet at night. The priests and scribes and temple guard went through the gate into the courtyard. The Roman centurion posted a guard and led away the rest of the soldiers. We were stopped just inside the arched passage of the outside gate. But the portress knew John. And I could tell that she had her doubts about me, but she let us in through the outer gate and then into the inner courtyard. We were inside the high priest's house, and John made his way into the hall where a large crowd was assembled. I'd never been in a house like that before. I stayed in the courtyard with the servants, and I hoped no one would question me. I didn't know what I should be doing, or I didn't know how to answer, and there was a chance that somebody might recognize me. What if one of the temple guards identified me as the man with the sword? What if the servant whose ear I cut off accused me? Then my heart froze. There he was, my victim. But he turned his head, and I saw a healthy ear right where it should be. I must have mistaken him in the firelight. Perhaps I would be safe if I stayed in the shadows. Everything was fine until that young portress came over from the gate to the fire, and her eye picked me out of the shadows, and she said, "You're one of this man's disciples, aren't you?" And everybody in the circle looked at me, and I just couldn't say yes. Not me. I'm not a follower of Jesus. I turned away from her, wishing she would disappear. She stayed a while, speaking in a low voice to one of her friends and pointing at me. The portress left the fire, but soon her friend spoke up. "This fellow is one of them. He was with Jesus the Nazarene, and other voices rose to agree, accusing me of being one of Jesus' followers, and anger and shame rose in me like hot poison. I said, man, I don't know what you're talking about. Maybe that satisfied them. They fell back to their gossip, buzzing about the events of the night, and things sort of settled down. I hoped I was finished with them. 2 denials surely would be enough to save my neck. But the night dragged on. What was happening in the hall? I was straining to listen. Evidently the council had convened after all. What were they doing? I moved closer to the hall, shifting for a position where I could see. I had no idea where John was. I finally found a place where I could see Jesus himself standing before the council, his head bowed, completely still, surrounded by noise and confusion. I asked the man next to me what was happening. He turned and said, "So you're a Galilean too, aren't you?" Several faces turned our way, and I recognized 2 or 3 who had been standing at the fire. Man, I don't know what you're talking about. Angry and excited, I began to call curses down on myself. I swore that I never knew Jesus. The words caught in my throat. From where Jesus stood before the council, he looked out into the courtyard, and in the yellow light our eyes met. It was just like he predicted. He told me that I would deny him 3 times, and I said it would never happen. Peter, the rock, the Master's faithful follower and chief defender. And I had become the voice of denial. The crowing of the cock told me that what I really was. I'm disgraced. The others will despise me. My name will become a curse. I stumbled to the gate. The portress let me out. All the warmth, the company, and the light left behind me. So late. It's so cold out here. I failed him. I was chief among the 12, and I failed him. 3 times I failed him. How could I fail the one who loved me so much? I wonder, do I really love him? Can real love produce this kind of failure? But I do love him, don't I? If I loved him, I would keep his word. I wouldn't fail. Do I even love him? The voice of the rooster testifies against me. My own words testify against me. My own heart condemns me. I was the leader of the 12. I confessed him on the mountain, but I denied him in the light. Hereafter, I will be known only as the voice of denial. The chief priest, known for deception. My name is Abishua. I'm one of the chief priests of Jerusalem, and we have charge over all the functions of the temple. It is our sacred office to offer sacrifices in the temple for the glory of God and the redemption of his people. It is the highest office in the land, and with the scribes, we are the most powerful religious leaders in Israel. Our authority is unquestioned. Everybody knows our lineage. From the time of Aaron, we have been God's chosen vessels, his official ministers. So it has always been, so it shall always be. We view any circumstance which might upset this order with profound concern. The recent case of the troublemaker from Galilee illustrates my exact point. You understand, his teachings have disturbed the people and have even called our temple practices into question. A dangerous extremist, he has challenged an authority and practice that transcends our time, one established and approved by the long-standing tradition. Certainly we have encountered similar challenges before, those who would destroy, cloaking themselves in the disguise of reform, but none as dangerous as this Jesus of Nazareth. And his followers and sympathizers have numbered in the thousands. Some even dare to claim that he may be the long-awaited Messiah. But surely if that were so, we in the priesthood should have been among the first to acclaim and honor him. No, I'm afraid the people are too easily deluded. You see, we have been aware of this man for quite some time, and none of our information substantiates these irresponsible claims. We first took notice of him in connection with the affairs of John the Baptist, so-called. Our informants tell us that when Jesus was baptized, some who were there reported a miraculous sign from heaven as he came up from the water. If you believe such things, perhaps you would also be interested in some beachfront property that I own over by the Dead Sea. Well, rumors spread quickly, and they're believed too easily by the common folk. And the small crowds, they became larger. He became decidedly dangerous. You may have heard, for example, that he healed a man with a withered hand on the Sabbath, a clear violation of the observance. But when his error was called to his attention, he actually claimed to be the Lord of the Sabbath. And when he came into Jerusalem, he made a terrible scene in the temple. He drove out all those who changed money, and he overturned their tables. You must excuse me. I don't like to raise my voice, but some things can't be tolerated. The temple and its precincts are our responsibility, and to attempt to reform without going through the proper authority is nothing short of criminal. He knew we were angry, so he tried to disguise his purposes. He stayed away from Jerusalem and taught the country people using parables to hide his malice. We did not wait idly. We attempted on several occasions to discredit him before the people he misled. And we have considered a long series of plans to remove him. Our opportunity presented itself at the time just before Passover when one of his followers came to us and offered to betray him. He was a dreadful fellow by the name of Judas, a common man of Cherith. But one must take one's opportunity where one finds them. And he came for a modest price, Judas did. For just 30 pieces of silver, Judas agreed to hand Jesus over to us. This was our time. It was the night of the Passover. We were still reclining at the table when Judas knocked on the door. He had come directly from the house where Jesus and his followers had gathered. And Judas told us that soon they would make their way out of the city by way of the eastern gate and cross the Kidron to the Garden of Gethsemane. It was their customary practice, and it fit our purpose exactly. An escort was arranged. Some men with arms was deemed prudent. Judas led us to the garden, and he kissed his master in familiar greeting. That was our sign. His arrest was effected, and he was taken directly to the house of the high priest. There he received a pretrial hearing by Annas, and subsequently he stood before Caiaphas to answer our charges. The trial was critical. We had to work quickly and carefully. Our charges against Jesus had to be substantiated by witnesses. Regrettably, we were forced to pay certain witnesses for their testimony. Their testimony was not as compelling as one would wish, but it did open the way for direct examination, and soon he was condemned by his own lips. He blasphemed openly before the council. Having gained Caiaphas' sentence, all we needed was the Roman governor, Pontius Pilate. You see, we're not to carry out capital punishment without the approval of the empire's occupation force. We have learned to play our cases before the Romans. All the governor cares about is the authority of Rome, and all we had to do was convince him that this Jesus was a dangerous rebel. Well, it was daybreak. We arrived at the governor's residence and called for a hearing. Sleepy-eyed and disinterested, Pilate heard our charges. We suffered some anxious moments as Pilate played the stupid Roman, adopting the position that Jesus had done nothing wrong. Clearly this wouldn't do. We were so close to the final solution. We had paid a disciple to betray him. We had paid witnesses for their testimony. We could not be stopped just one step short of our goal. So as Pilate interviewed the Nazarene, we worked our way through the crowd, arranging for a convincing solidarity. So when Pilate stood him before us, the crowd answered with one voice, our voice, "Crucify him!" The chant surged through the crowd like undulations of an angry serpent. The governor took our message, Jesus must die. Pilate was in no mood for a fight. He released Jesus to the crowd, and he was taken out of the city to the place of the skull and crucified as a common criminal. Our work was finished. Pilate made one final gesture. A sign was placed above the head of Jesus as he hung on the cross. The words were written in Aramaic and Latin and Greek for all the world to read. And it said, Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. Well, we objected. Don't write King of the Jews. Write instead, he said, I am the King of the Jews. But old Pilate, he refused. Stubborn Roman fool. Small matter, though. Jesus died on the cross. Terrible in a way, of course, without question. But we look at it as a great triumph. The threat to God's appointed priesthood had failed. Our place and our office had been secured. The priesthood continues to offer sacrifice for the glory of God and the redemption of his people, so it ever shall be. Then there's the voice of Caiaphas. He's in Matthew 26:59 or something like that. Some call me a puppet, but I'm not. Those who see me as a puppet obviously know nothing about the strength of family ties. They have no understanding of my loyalty to my father, or actually my father-in-law, as you would call him. He has a strength of influence over me as though he were my father. Annas he's a powerful man, perhaps the most powerful Jew in Palestine. He was appointed high priest by the governor Quirinius 25 years ago. During his term, the Sanhedrin was little more than his personal judicial body. And even though he was deposed more than 15 years ago, he still dominates the council and the priesthood. Always a manipulator, enforcing his will. He had his successor removed from office so that his son, Eleazar, could serve as high priest. And then he worked things so that I received the title. And his purposes do not end with me. There are still 4 other sons and a grandson behind me. My father is a powerful man. I do not doubt that each one in turn will serve as high priest. Our father gets his way. And now, although Annas is the power, I have the office. I do pretty much what he wants me to do, and he makes sure I know what he wants me to do. So you see, the events of that night, they were not entirely my doing. A mob burst into the courtyard of our home, dragging a prisoner. They took him first to my father-in-law. I'm used to being second. Whenever there's a quarrel for the high priest to decide, the matter is brought to me for a hearing, but only after Annas has heard it. It was late, midnight or later, I say, and I had already gone to bed. Apparently Annas was still up, and he interviewed their prisoner while I dressed, and I came down the hall and greeted the chief priest. By that time, some of the elders of the city and many members of the Sanhedrin had arrived, and the man with the mob was Jesus of Nazareth. They presented their accusation. He was a blasphemer. His case must be decided immediately. Blasphemy, a capital offense. I have to tell you, I wasn't much interested in this business. But I caught a look from my father, and he was. So I hastily convened a meeting of the Sanhedrin, since many were at hand. We heard the evidence. Frankly, there wasn't much of a case. The preliminary interview with Annas had turned up nothing and we could use, and it was clear that we would need more evidence if we hoped to make any charges stick. And I didn't like hearing a capital case without the full council, so I adjourned the council so we might renew the inquisition later when more could be there. I commanded the officers to take Jesus down to the dungeon in the lowest level of my house, there to be held behind bars in chains until the evidence was gathered and the full council could convene. I didn't know what else to do with him. Well, in the morning, just before dawn, we reconvened. Most of the council members were present, along with the elders of the people, both the chief priest and the scribes. And there were some witnesses who had claimed to have heard Jesus make blasphemous statements, but the witnesses could not agree. There weren't 2 stories that matched in the whole lot of them. If we could not get some real evidence, we would have to dismiss this case. Finally, one member of the Sanhedrin asked him directly, "If you are the Christ, tell us." That was something Maybe the prisoner would supply his own evidence. But his response was not as direct. His response was this: if I tell you, you will not believe me. And then he said something about the Son of Man being seated at the right hand of God. That enraged the council. One of them asked, "So you are the Son of God?" And to this, his reply was, "I am." Man, the room erupted. Voices shouted, "Blasphemer, traitor, pagan." The Sanhedrin went into the frenzy, but he stood silent. Of course, it was all wrong. How did we expect to get away with this? This was no trial. In the first place, our law does not permit a trial to be held at night. And yet we had been up all night long, and then we had the man before us only because of a blood money bribe paid to one of his followers, plus we had asked the defendant to incriminate himself. This was excluded from our law as well. And there I was, about to pronounce a capital sentence, even though our law does not permit a sentence to be pronounced until the day after the conviction. What in the world were we thinking? Well, it was this kind of thing you hope nobody ever hears about. I could feel my Father's eyes on me. It crossed my mind that I had opportunity to step out of his shadow, to rise to a higher level of justice, and to throw this case out, but there was Annas. His will beat on me like a hot summer sun. I really had no choice but to follow his wishes and to please the chief priest. I knew what I ought to do, but I also knew what I had to do. I'm one of the 12. One of the 12 voices of Easter. Mine is the voice of condemnation. It was my voice that proclaimed the innocent Nazarene guilty of blasphemy. What else could I do? Don't you understand the power of my family? Or don't you understand the significance of the office of high priest? I'm not a puppet. I'm a dutiful son. In that room that morning, a simple man submitted himself to the will of his Father. That's all. Pilate. This is not the life I hoped for. I'm a Roman citizen. My family is wealthy. Our name is held in honor and respect. For all my adult life, I've carefully made my way among the powerful elite of Rome. I positioned myself to receive a prestigious appointment from Caesar. My glory would be to do his bidding, to be part of the greatest empire that the world would ever know. Kings and kingdoms pass away, but Rome endures. The glory of my name to serve Caesar. But the emperor sent me here to Judea. What glory or prestige can there be in governing this mad race of people? The Jews are subject to Roman power, but they're not of the Roman mind. You see, in Rome, we cultivate common sense and peace and ordered prosperity, but these people, they're impossible. They're unreasonable, they're rebellious, they're restless, they're fanatics. There's nothing to love or to admire among them. Nothing noble, no honor. Rome doesn't even govern here. She just babysits. They have incomprehensible religious convictions. They stubbornly hold antique traditions that no one can explain sensibly, and they automatically hate me. Not that it worries me, though. If I were loved by this mad race of people, that would worry me. They have no notion of Rome and her empire. They must be taught, but they won't learn. I've done things for the very purpose of making them mad. I took their temple treasure to pay for an aqueduct I was building. Another time, I brought the Roman standard into Jerusalem to their temple. All the golden shields inscribed with the images and the names of our gods. How they screamed about defilement and desecration. They make my service here miserable, and I make their subjection to Rome miserable. Well, it was springtime when this happened. And I breathed deeply the the sea air wafting in from the Mediterranean to my palace in Caesarea, but the spring is always spoiled by the Passover festival. Pollen, if you live in East Texas. I hoped the Jews would cause me no problems during their week of celebration. Perhaps this spring would be different from others. That's what I hoped anyway. So I journeyed to Jerusalem so I would be at hand in case there was any trouble. You see, their feast commemorates some deliverance in their ancient history, and their nation still hatches the occasional desert deliverer who would overcome the empire of Rome. Prudence requires a watchful eye at seasons when national spirit runs high. I was awakened early in the morning just after sunrise by the noise of their council. The Sanhedrin, the chief priests, and the elders, and an angry crowd was at my gate. I recognized that mob spirit, dangerous and difficult to turn aside. They would be trying to lynch someone. I would have to play for time and let their passion cool off a little bit before we could settle the business. Well, the gate was open, and they burst into my courtyard. I walked slowly to my place, to my palace. The moment needed calm. It was easy to spot their victim. He stood out, their target, the object of their concentrated fury. He was bound. I asked their leader what they wanted. He said, this man was misleading the Jewish people, telling them not to pay taxes to Caesar and claiming to be their Messiah. How ironic to hear these Jews who so hated paying taxes to Rome, charging one of their own with speaking against Roman taxes. Surely their real grievance laid somewhere else. Well, he might be trying to raise some money for his own treasury if he thought himself to be their Messiah king. I asked him directly, are you really the king of the Jews? I wanted everyone to hear the sarcasm in my voice. It was a ridiculous charge, this Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. Well, the Sanhedrin and the chief priests were blind to their folly. I could tell this man had committed no serious crime. I told the Jewish leaders so. No, they insisted. He causes unrest everywhere from Galilee to Jerusalem. Is he a Galilean, I asked. I saw an opportunity to divert him. Galilee was under the jurisdiction of Herod Antipas, who was just happened to be visiting Jerusalem, and Herod was as close as they would ever come to having a king of the Jews. He was incompetent, but he was an ethnic aristocracy of a sort, and Rome uses his type whenever we get a chance. So I sent this angry band to Herod, and I sent along an assistant to observe, just so I would know. I was glad to get rid of my problem while creating another one for dear old Antipas. But before long, they came back. It seemed that Herod, drawing from his deep wisdom and exercising his keen political mind, had mocked Jesus and taunted him, asking him to perform miracles. When the prisoner would not perform, Herod wearied of his sport. So he dressed Jesus in a gorgeous robe and sent him back to my judgment hall. I must say the robe looked better on Jesus than it ever did on Herod, King of the Jews, indeed. Again, the chief priest and the rulers of the people demanded a judgment. Their hatred for this man, it just couldn't be cooled. Again, I did what I could to put them off. I examined the prisoner again. You know, it's not easy, this business of judgment. The law is not always adequate for the case. It's no fun dealing with someone like Jesus at the judgment seat. I was two failures. What is it they say? An innocent prisoner convicts a guilty judge? Well, I suppose it won't be the last time. And to complicate matters, my wife, she interrupted. She called me aside and urgently called me aside. She frightened me. She looked like walking dead. She said she had dreamed about this man, and she told me don't have anything to do with him. She was terrified. I confess it unnerved me. But one cannot run an empire on dreams and visions. I could put it off no longer. I told him I found no fault in the prisoner. He's no threat to Rome. Oh, it's not just the taxes. They said Jesus transgressed some provisions of their religious law. Fine, I said, try him in your own council. Don't bring Jewish religious law into a Roman court. They were furious. They said their law required death. I was running out of diversions. Herod wouldn't take the case. Their counsel wouldn't take the case. I had raised my voice twice in evasion, but some things just wouldn't go away. I didn't think they really would insist on crucifixion. Rome crucifies Jews to make sure everybody understands who rules the world. Jews would not crucify a Jew. Every cross reminded them of a king they didn't want and could never defeat. I just needed to give them a way out. I felt sure they would back down, so I proposed a compromise. I'd followed the custom of releasing a prisoner to them each year at this time. I did so to demonstrate Roman kindness, to generate goodwill. I thought perhaps I could release Jesus to them as that prisoner. Well, the chief priest would have none of it. The crowd cried for Barabbas, a thoroughly nasty sort to be released instead of Jesus. I could not believe my ears. How they must have hated this Nazarene. I couldn't escape. I would have to release Barabbas. And still I had to deal with Jesus. My next thought was to have Jesus scourged. Perhaps some blood would satisfy them. The soldiers of Rome use a whip with several thongs with pieces of lead or brass or sharp bits of bone in the end of it, and they laid his back bare. In short order, the flesh hung from his back in strips. Deep veins and arteries were exposed. I brought Jesus to the mob. Surely his blood would satisfy their thirst, but again, I was wrong. They screamed for his death a third time. I told them he was innocent. But the crowd began to yell, "Crucify him, crucify him, crucify him." They would be satisfied with nothing less than his crucifixion. There was no more room for evasion. I finally realized that the only way to be done with this matter was to release Jesus to the crowd. I called from my basin, and I washed my hands of his guilt or innocence for all to see. Then I turned him over to the mob, and they crucified him. Nothing I tried would make it go away. The problem of Jesus always came back to me. It is not a thing to be proud of. Not the way I hope my service to Caesar would go. But I do not see what I could have done differently. Just bad luck, I suppose. I console myself with the thought that few will ever know of this matter. A minor affair of a mad race in a backwater province. Who will know? My name, when remembered, will be remembered with the glory and honor of Caesar, ruler of the earth and Rome and the kingdom that will endure. My voice, a voice of evasion, will grow silent, but my name will be remembered in honor and not because of some unfortunate man who suffered under Pontius Pilate. Let me read one more. Jerusalem is our capital, the major city in our land. It teems with people at any time of the year, but especially at festival time. Jews from everywhere converge on Jerusalem to observe the appointed feast. Our city is filled with crowds, and it doesn't take much to turn a crowd into a mob. A throng is a crowd in love. A mob is a crowd in hate. I've been in a mob or two, and I was there when the mob raised its voice in hate. The city was packed with Jews that were here to celebrate the Passover. I was in the street late on the night of the feast when I saw a group of priests and members of the Sanhedrin making their way toward the Roman fortress of Antonia. Then they went past us in a cold rush. A number of people followed along, curious and excited. Something big was up. So I fell in step, and a few snatches of conversation. Soon I learned there was going to be an arrest and a trial. Somebody's going to die. We stopped at the gate. We waited while the priest went into the fortress. Some of the temple police were there too. Torches and clubs appeared and were passed through the crowd. A crowd draws a crowd, you know. And soon there were scores of us, eager, energized, and expectant. The priest banged out through the fortress gate with a contingent of soldiers and led us out of the city to the east. Our torches made little light in the heavy blackness. We were swallowed up in the cool rush of darkness and stumbling, hurried excitement. We came to a garden and found the one they wanted. I was disappointed. I thought with the soldiers and the mob that we might be there to surprise some outlaws. I was ready for a fight. But they were after one man who looked completely unremarkable. Evidently, he was a rabbi who had been praying there in the garden with his disciples. He came to us with a greeting of peace, and the man next to me pointed and said that was Jesus the Nazarene. I recognized the name. He had caused some kind of trouble in the temple the other day. And religious leaders, they were determined to silence him. Well, Jesus was bound and dragged from the garden back to the city, to the palace of the high priest. Several of us got into the courtyard of Caiaphas' house, and we grouped around the fires and trading guesses about what was happening to the prisoner in the palace. And as the night grew old, I found a corner and sat watching the fire. I must have dozed off, but suddenly I was awake. Noise and confusion, pushing and shoving. We were on our way, pressing through the narrow streets, bumped against stone walls. We were heading for the fortress again. We stopped just outside the governor's judgment hall and we shouted for Pilate. The council had condemned Jesus for blasphemy. They wanted an execution. We had to make sure the governor would hand down a death sentence. Jesus stood before the governor, beaten and bloodied, but Pilate was being difficult, and this just ignited our rage. Pilate challenged us. I find no fault in this man. What do you want me to do with him? And the chief priest led the chant, crucify him, crucify him. We picked it up quickly. Perhaps you've never been swept up in pure hatred. Rage has a mindless strength that no power can resist. I shouted with the others, crucify him, kill him, he deserves to die. All this for a man I didn't even know. Pilate had the Roman soldiers scourge him. When Pilate stood before him and showed us the results, we flew into a blind frenzy. I could see that Pilate was shaken. Pilate was ours, and so was the prisoner. He delivered Jesus to us to bear his cross out of the city to Golgotha. Crowds lined the streets, mocking and jeering. Every hateful and spiteful emotion anyone had was spent on that man. He bled, he stumbled, he fell. Finally, the Roman centurion commanded a man coming in from the country to bear the cross for him. All the while, we cursed and railed against this Jesus. We finally made our way through the gate of the city out to the place the Romans called Calvary, where common criminals were crucified, raised on a cross, barely off the ground, and left to die. The Roman soldiers nailed him in place and uprighted the cross, dropping it into a hole in the ground with a jolt. You could hear the Nazarene groan as the weight of his body pulled against the nails in his hands and his feet. The mob spread across the hillside to watch. Most were men like myself, cursing the one on the cross. He had claimed to be a savior. We taunted him, calling him to come down from the cross and to save himself. But there were women there too, beating their breast and lamenting him. You could tell from the agony in their cries that some were his followers. But our jeers drowned out their voices. The Jewish religious leaders were there mocking him. The Roman soldiers ridiculed him. We wanted him to die. We relished his pain and suffering. A strange thing it is to watch a man die, a fascinating horror. There is no dignity on a cross hanging there in public view. The mob feeling drained from me, and I was just one man watching another man die. He was covered with blood and sweat. Those other two guys, they whimpered and cursed and pleaded for mercy. But this man, he was different. He spoke from the cross, but not in anger, not in bitterness. He spoke in compassion to one of the thieves hanging next to him. And he spoke to a woman, I suppose to be his mother. There were words to a man with her spoken toward heaven. I heard him call on his Father to forgive us, those assembled in the mob. How could he pray for our forgiveness after what we had done to him? How could he answer our hatred with love? Yes, I was in that crowd. I was part of the angry mob. We raised our voices in pure hatred. But the one on the cross answered our hatred with love and forgiveness. I don't understand it. He didn't live long enough to remember my voice, but as long as I live, I will never forget his voice. You pray with me. Father, we love you. Thank you for letting us see afresh and anew this wonderful, wonderful story of Easter through the eyes of 5 or 6 characters who were a part of this story. I pray that over the next 4 or 5 days as we head toward the Lord's Day on Sunday, number one, that it wouldn't be a day about eggs and a day about food, but it would be several days that would remind us about the price that you paid to give us salvation and then eternal life. God, I pray this week that we keep our minds and our hearts stayed upon you and your finished work that was done just for us. So Lord, let this story not close with this book that I've closed on this stand tonight. Let this story live. Let this story come alive through the next 4 or 5 days, just as we recall it and we think about it. And we think about what you have done for us. Dismiss us under your watch and in your care. And bless our service in this place, this Lord's Day. I pray it in